Hey, David Brewster here, new episode of 3 for All. This is 3 Brad Gillis Licks from 1982, and I've had some requests to feature more from this legendary guitarist, and we have looked at some, music from Brad before. There's a Night Ranger chord play episode from 4 years ago. There's a 3 for All with Brad Gillis and Jeff Watson from 3 years ago. And Brad also appears in the Guitar Noises and Sound Effects episode. That's a rant video. And I think we looked at Brad's race car effect in that lesson. But this episode's going to look at more of his licks, and I'm definitely serving this up as a tribute to Brad, but also as a tribute to the late great Ozzy Osbourne. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that Ozzy's gone. It just seems really strange and surreal, like wow, he's been active and on the scene my entire life. I mean, technically before I was even born. So the fact that Ozzy's gone is really strange. But this episode's going to be a tribute to him and also Brad Gillis, which he worked with Ozzy in 1982. So if you're a Night Ranger Brad Gillis fan or an Ozzy Osbourne fan, this lesson's totally for you. So most people associate Brad with the band Night Ranger, definitely an essential and legendary group, and I already mentioned that he worked with Ozzy Osbourne in 1982. Brad also appears on a Queensryche album, and he worked with Fiona and Vicious Rumors. He appears on the Hearing Aid, Benefit album, and he also played with a group called Rubicon. And Rubicon was the band that basically turned into Night Ranger. And when I was putting this episode together and looking at Brad's bio, I was like, what's this Rubicon band? So I checked it out. They released 2 albums, one in 78, one in 79. And it's like this super funky, like prog funk kind of thing. And I'd never heard it before. I was really blown away. I was like, man, this is cool. I actually found a copy of their first album on Discogs and I ordered it. I think it was like $10. But if you're a Rubicon fan, Night Ranger fan, I am going to put together a Rubicon episode as soon as that album gets here and I kind of wrap their music around my head and fingers a little bit more because it's really cool. But definitely, there's no question Brad's an essential guitarist, and here's an image with the people he's worked with in his career. There's a few others I missed, but this is like the big ones right here. So like I've already mentioned a couple times, I'm putting this lesson together as a tribute to Brad, but also as a tribute to the late great Ozzy Osbourne. And, after the news broke, I just felt gutted. And I was working on the Alvin Lee Soloing Secrets that day and finished that lesson and uploaded it. And right after I uploaded it to YouTube, then that's when I saw the news reports and social media posts about Ozzy. And I was just in a funk the rest of that day, and I pulled out his albums, listening to his music and thinking about him. And it definitely, kind of messed me up. I'm sure everybody watching this, kind of messed you up too. But back in 1982, Brad Gillis did the unthinkable. Randy Rhoads tragically died that year. Ozzy and company was on, the Diary of Madman tour. And there was a little bit of flip-flopping initially because it was a tragic accident, when Randy died. But when they finally selected Brad, he worked up the material. And in my opinion, he just stepped up like a stunt guitarist and knocked that music out of the park, learning Randy's riffs and licks and solos. He was like Evel Knievel, jumping over Randy Rhoads' mountain, and he nailed it, in my opinion. He appears on the live album Speak of the Devil, which is mainly, Sabbath covers on that album, but they did perform, Ozzy, Randy Rhoads era, solo material on that tour too. They just didn't share it on the album. But, what a incredible moment in heavy metal and hard rock history. Brad Gillis stepping in for the fallen great Randy Rhoads. I mean, that's historic right there. So the licks and ideas in this episode actually came from a live performance in 1982 during Ozzy's, Speak of the Devil tour with Brad Gillis and the band. And Brad's notoriously known for whammy abuse and bar dips and race car, sound effects. Screaming, dive bombing harmonics and overhand, like pull off tapping ideas and stuff, and all sorts of just random kind of spontaneous things. But that's really exciting when you watch and hear him play because you never really know what he's going to do until he whips it out. And there's a lot of that in this episode. A lot of bar abuse, and there's a really famous Randy Rhoads lick, near the end. If you've heard Ozzy's, Randy Rhoads tribute album, which is on the wall right there, then you've heard that lick I'm talking about. So if you're an Ozzy Osbourne fan, a Brad Gillis fan, even a Randy Rhoads fan, which Randy's lick does make an appearance in this lesson, buckle up, because here we go. So the first lick's not really a lick, it's like this melodic chord-based idea with some bar dips and then something unexpected at the end, which is why I grabbed it. Something like this. time. You know, something like that. So it's not really a lick, but this kind of sets up like this solo section during the concert for Brad's solo. So right there, you're kind of doing like a partial, like it's like a D5 over A, and then like an A5, because you're going from that D note to that E. So it's all like double stops or two note, you know, implied chords there. It's like that D over A to that little part of A5, and then part of D major, like a part of D sus4 right there, implied. And I think he does like some bar wiggling there. Kind of dive the bar, and then I'm seeing him grab, it looks like an A octave, but you just hear the open A and that fretted A there. I don't really hear the higher octave up there on the B string, but his hand is in that position there. Right, like that. Right? And then after he hits that, what looks like an A octave, but I think it's just right there, then he basically goes back here and starts tremolo picking, or kind of like just aggressively picking that open A string while it's ringing. And Brad always did stuff like that, or always does stuff like that. You know, overhand, you know, fretting, and he'd start doing like pull-offs and stuff. Just really unusual things. And that's really unusual to have a ringing, you know, octave technically. And you're kind of picking like way down there toward the nut. And it's kind of a visual thing, and it also sounds kind of cool because it has that real kind of thin sound, you know, closer to the nut. But what an unusual kind of attention-getting, you know, intro for Brad's solo. Okay, next up's a bar dip legato phrase, and when I watched the footage of Brad's solo, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna grab that one because it's cool. It's not hard to play, it just sounds really cool, like this. One more time. So think A minor pentatonic like the box, but we're way up there on the 17th fret. And he starts with this G, E to D, like he pulls off on the B, grabs that D note, and then goes back to that high G, and then he dips his bar on that high G. Like that. And after that first one, that's the very first one, then we're gonna hop over here and grab this D to C, pull off, grab that A note, and then go right back to that high G and dip your bar again, like that. So the first one, and then the second one, and then you want to do that second one 3 times in a row, like this. It almost sounds like a siren or an alert or something like that, but it's just Brad's kind of bar dipped legato action. And he's always doing stuff like that, you know, manipulating the bar and smearing notes and just bending things with the bar in different ways, of course dive bombs and stuff. And that's a really cool, like, bar-dipped melodic phrase. Okay, next up's this crazy stretch legato idea, and there's some things happening in the first half that kind of remind me of Steve Lukather a little bit, and then everything else is just this wicked, terrifying lick, like this. One more time. So it's really cool, and he's basically doing this half-step bend, this big kind of glorified half-step bend from that B into C at first, kind of rake into it. And then he starts doing this kind of pull-off, like C, B to A, and he's bar dipping. That's the part that kind of reminds me of Lukather. I've heard Lukather do that kind of stuff before. Also Steve Vai and a bunch of other people too. Anybody with a bar that likes to play with it, I mean, they've probably done different versions of that lick, but right there. And then you hear these kind of quick, like a quick trill between that B and A, and then C to A, B to A, C to A. And then he starts doing the stretch legato part. So the first half, right there is when you start doing this. And it changes, it's like a sequence for this, but that's terrifying because you're literally not picking. It's all fret hand legato. Like that. And then right there, you're just gonna kind of cycle between that D and C. And then like that B, C to B, and then just end up on that A. So it's like a... And that last thing you hear is that A note right there. You know, something like that. It's terrifying, and I love those kind of super stretchy, you know, technique boosting licks like that. Okay, here's a bonus lick from this footage, and if you've ever heard Ozzy's Randy Rhoads tribute album, then you've heard this lick. It's played during Randy's, you know, Suicide Solution guitar solo. And I've actually shown this to students for decades. I remember working on this, you know, myself when I was a teenager, just kind of frantically trying to play as much Van Halen and Randy Rhoads as I possibly could. And it's a great one for building pinky strength, and also kind of developing, like, you know, open string pull-offs too. But it's this very famous Randy Rhoads lick. Right? One more time. You know, something like that. And we're basically just doing a pull-off here, this E, C to the high E open. So each one is 4 times, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're moving to this D and B to the high E open. And then that C, A to the high E open. And then that B, G sharp to the high E open. So right there. And that's all index and pinky finger right there. And then do the exact same thing on the B string. Now you're moving from that B, going to that G note, and then the open B. Then that A to that F sharp to the open B. And then that G note to that E to the open B. And then that F sharp to that D sharp to the open B. So it's the same pattern on the high E and on the B string. And like I said, that's kind of a great pinky workout, and it really does kind of shape up your like kind of open string pull-off patterns and legato. And of course it keeps going. He starts tapping and it kind of changes the sequence there, but I wanted to include that because it's definitely a very famous Randy Rhoads moment from Tribute and Randy's live solo. And I thought that was really cool that Brad, you know, and Ozzy's band, they included that during this kind of showcase solo section in the middle of the concert. Right, that's going to wrap this episode of 3 for All with this look at 3 Brad Gillis licks from 1982. And definitely Brad is a dynamite, legendary guitarist, and he did work, you know, for that 1 year. It was almost a full year, but the year of 1982, working with Ozzy, stepping in after Randy Rhoads had died. And he really did just step up to the plate and just knock a grand slam home run. I can't really think of very many players at that time that could have done that, you know, and I think Brad pushed himself. You can tell he had that fire under his butt, like, I know who I'm playing with and who I'm replacing, like in the band here. And, you know, those moments in rock history and metal history are really interesting, like when a musician is really under the gun and they've got all that pressure and stress, and, you know they have to rise to the occasion and perform. And Brad definitely did, you know, a legend. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Nail It Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. And rest in peace, Ozzy Osbourne.